friends. This is Jesse Juarez, president of the Rotary Club of sunny Seaside, California. You're watching a presentation which was recorded live at one of our club meetings. Seaside Rotary meets twice a month via Zoom. Our meetings feature dynamic presentations by many of the movers and shakers that make Monterey County such a vibrant and hardworking community. If you'd like to join a meeting or learn more about Rotary and the work that we do, you can reach out to Seaside Rotary Club at gmail.com. Again, that's Seaside Rotary Club at gmail.com. You can also connect with us on our Facebook page. As always, don't forget to like and subscribe to this channel for more dynamic content. Beautiful. All right, ladies and gentlemen, our next guest plays a crucial role in the Monterey County criminal justice system. The Office of the District Attorney works hard to ensure that the wheels of due process and justice are available to all Monterey County residents. So let's give a warm Seaside Rotary welcome to District Attorney Jeannine Pacioni. Welcome.
Hello, and thank you for having me. As I was chatting with Jess, I'm a fellow Rotarian. I belong to the Salinas Downtown Club and have for some years, and love my fellowship that I get there. I love to do the community service that we get to do, and I have a history of community service too. I was part of the Junior League of Monterey County. We started the Children's Museum in Monterey, and then National Charity League, which is a mother-daughter philanthropy organization. So that I appreciate the efforts that Rotary does in giving back to the community, and I enjoy participating in that. So I am your district attorney. Prior to my being elected in 2018, our district attorney in the county of Monterey was Dean Flippo. He was our DA for 28 years. He was the longest serving DA at the time in the state of California. So he decided to retire in 2018, and I decided to run, and I ran successfully against myself. No one else ran against me for the job. I guess no one wanted it at that time. And I was sworn in January of 2019. So what I'm going to talk to you about today is some of the challenges that have been in the criminal justice system since I took over in 2019, and what we're doing now in the DA's office to try and work in this current environment. And if I could, I'm going to, if I'm allowed to share my screen, I'd like to do that if possible.
Absolutely. I'm going to turn on that function right now. You should be able to share now.
Let's see if we can do this. All right.
Perfect.
Let's see here. It's not what I wanted to do, so I'm going to back out of that. Try this again. Slideshow. There we go. Now, are you seeing the my logo and then my name?
Absolutely.
Excellent. All right, here we go. So when I took over in 2019, one of the things that I did was I changed our logo. Our logo, when Dean was our district attorney, was the county kind of tree, the county logo, and then it was in the shape of a star. And I really didn't feel that that represented what the DA's office did or who we were. Joe Mora actually built our, was a designer for our building here in Salinas, and on the east side of the building, there is a figure of Lady Justice, and that is the centerpiece of our new logo that we took over. She tends to look like she's indigenous, maybe Mayan. She's got the sword, which is one of the symbols of Lady Justice, and then the scales of justice, which she has there. So we adopted that new logo when I came in, and my staff has really loved it. Actually, it speaks to them, and I feel it speaks more to the community than just the generic county logo. So this is our main office. It's located on 142 West Alisal. Our offices were located in trailers for 15 years prior to us moving into this building. And a lot of people don't know exactly where the DA's office is located. This particular location was previously a courthouse, and our offices were located on one floor of the west side of the building, which is at the very bottom there on the upper photograph. And then when the courts moved into the new courthouse, the county kind of took over this building, and then eventually it was so asbestos ridden, it really needed to be rehabbed. So the county spent $40 million rehabbing this building. So right now, our offices consist of the entire building and the upper photo, which is 4 floors. And they built this bridge that connects the east and west wing. And then we occupy the east wing as well. So I don't know if any of you have been around for a long time in that community, but Bill Curtis was a prior DA, and he was a DA that was prior to Dean Flippo. He was a big influence on the direction of the DA's office. And this is one of our rooms in the DA's office. This is our media room, and it was named after Bill Curtis because of his influence in terms of the DA's office. This is where, pre-COVID, we would have press conferences and the public comes in. The county did a really remarkable job in renovating this building for us. And this is our training room. This is actually the size of a former courtroom. And those benches that you see in this photograph are the original benches that were in the courthouse at the time. They were preserved so that when we remodeled, they were brought back into this room. And this room will seat about 150 people in non-COVID times for training purposes. So it's good. Our staff is 155 employees. So what about COVID? COVID hit in our county here. The shelter-in-place order occurred on March 17th of 2020. We had 85% of our staff we sent home to telework. This could not have been possible if we hadn't already started the transition from paper files to electronic files. So all of we are a fileless office, which allowed us to continue operations from wherever these people were, our staff. So our staff, attorneys, and investigators did work remotely up until June of 21. So they were, for 16 months, they were working from home remotely. My executive staff, we worked in the office every day. There were court appearances that needed to be made. I have a very good relationship with the court, the chief probation officer, probation, and the sheriff's department. And we met daily in the beginning of COVID, trying to figure out how we were going to keep the wheels of justice turning. This was a big deal. Everyone was terrified. We didn't know what COVID meant. We didn't know a lot about it, and people were afraid. But we really worked collaboratively together, and I'm super proud of that. As a result, we have no backlog of cases in Monterey County. Now, that may not mean much to you, thinking, okay, well, that's great. But I'm going to give you a comparison. In Santa Clara County, they have a backlog of 40,000 cases. And what's going to happen is when the Chief Justice gives them or stops giving them continuation orders, which she's been doing for the last 2 years, when that happens, those people have a right to trial in a misdemeanor in 30 days and a felony in 60 days. And there's not going to be a way that they're going to be able to process 40,000 cases in 60 days. And as a result, a lot of those cases, majority of those cases, will need to be dismissed. We don't have that situation here. And how we did that is, we worked with the jail to identify violent offenders who shouldn't be released. And then those other people that weren't violent offenders, we made COVID offers, they were called, to get them out of custody early, to try and keep the cases moving where we could. If it was a victim involved case, we handled that a little bit differently. But if it wasn't a victim case, then we felt we had a little bit more leeway to dispose of the case and try and get them out of custody. Because of course, you've got people in custody, they're very close quarters. and high transmission of COVID was going on at that time. But nobody did this alone. This was a result of us working collaboratively, understanding what needed to be done. So what else happened during COVID? In June of 2020, I started my cold case task force. Now, previously, the police agencies would get together every so often and try and roundtable a cold case. And a cold case is an unsolved case. But my emphasis is on cold cases that are homicides or violent offenses. So what I did is I have a collection of investigators that use their volunteer time and an attorney who in my office, and then a retired deputy chief from the city of Monterey, Bill Clark. And they pulled together all of the cases that are considered unsolved homicides in the county of Monterey. Well, that's over 559 people who have been murdered and their cases are unsolved. That's a huge lift. So what we did is we wanted to identify cases where there was the possibility of using DNA technology to identify the perpetrator. And not every case has DNA, so not these cases are not all going to be solved, but we have made significant progress just in the short time with this volunteer staff working on these cases. We use DNA technology in private labs, and these are labs that do genealogy testing where it may not be the suspect's actual DNA. It might, yes, it's the suspect's DNA in the sample, but we may not be able to identify them directly. But because they have a family member who has uploaded their DNA voluntarily to an open source, we're able to make that connection and then open an investigation from there. As a result of that, we have solved 6 homicides in 18 months, and all 6 of those people are being prosecuted currently for those homicide cases. Most of these cases are older cases, meaning 1974 to 1990s, because after 1990, DNA technology was a lot more common, and we've already tried this, investigative technique already. We work with the agencies that are willing to work with us. Right now, we're working with 8 of the agencies. We have 23 agencies in the county of Monterey. So it's a slow effort for them to want to give over their case to us. We don't charge any of the agencies any money. And up to now, we hadn't had any funding to do the DNA testing. So we were scraping it together from other agencies. If, for example, Seaside, they found some funding to help us with DNA on one of their cases. The Sheriff's Department found some funding to help us with one of their cases to pay for the DNA testing. Well, we just received our federal grant. Only 15 were given nationwide, and we received it for $535,000 for the next 3 years. So we have 3 years to spend this money, and it will be spent because this testing is very expensive. These private labs are very expensive, and our state labs don't do the type of DNA testing that we're engaging in for these cases. Likewise, we had the Floyd case happen, and it rocked our world. It rocked everyone's world in terms of social justice, criminal justice. And one of the things that that became clear to me is that a lot of our community doesn't understand what the DA's office does. And, we've got this really nice building, at least great cement walls, and we're all very nicely protected here, but people don't understand what happens inside the walls. And people who had traditionally been underrepresented or underserved, felt understandably distrust for the district attorney's office and law enforcement. So I created the Multicultural Community Council. And what the mission is up there on the slide, and you can read it for yourself. But essentially, this is a collection of community leaders, and they include the NAACP, LULAC, AAPI, mental health representatives, faith leaders, LGBTQ+, veterans representatives, crisis services, and there's a Middle Eastern representative as well. And what we do is we meet monthly to discuss whatever the council wants to discuss. I don't set the agenda. There are two co-chairs, which are members of the council, and they decide what we're going to talk about. And nothing's off base, nothing is off limits unless there's some reason why there's some confidentiality requirement that I can't share any information about. And that hasn't happened to date. And so the council acts as a bridge between myself and their constituencies. And, you know, it's hopefully building trust. That's the goal of this particular council. It has helped in two ways, just in the short time period it's been around. I started this in June of last year. Actually, no, it was before that. It was earlier in last year. One of the ways it helped is that recently, well, in July of last year, there was an officer-involved shooting in the city of Salinas. And there was some information circulating, and Salinas PD unfortunately killed a 19-year-old young man in an officer-involved shooting. And the community was understandably upset. They were anxious. They didn't understand why it had happened. And there was a lot of misinformation being bandied about. So the president of LULAC contacted me because all of these people have my personal cell phone where they can contact me at any time. I always take their calls. This happened on a Friday night, which I go out to every officer involved shooting now, because I think it's important. If I'm going to evaluate a charging situation, I need to see it. So I was out there that Friday night. Saturday morning, the president of LULAC called me up saying that he was very concerned because the young man was shot and he was merely holding a Coke can. I was very quickly able to tell him that no, that youth was not holding a Coke can, that he was actually holding what looked to be a firearm. And we had that communication. And Chris Barrera was able to go back to the community, his community, and say, no, this is wrong. This information about this Coke can is not correct. It appeared to be a firearm. And so that kind of quelled the swell of anxiety that the community was feeling. Then a comment came up where they felt that the young man didn't speak Spanish, and the officer was communicating to this particular person in Spanish and in English. And it was true that the youth did come from an area that spoke an indigenous language. However, he also spoke Spanish. And we knew that because we have prior contacts with law enforcement where a body cam footage showed him, this deceased, talking with an officer in Spanish. So we know he understood Spanish based upon that particular interaction. Again, I was able to communicate with Chris that he actually did speak Spanish and was able to communicate with law enforcement. And as a result, the community was, no one was happy about the officer involved shooting. That no one should be happy when there's an officer involved shooting. But they understood that there were facts that they didn't know before, and it quelled the swell of discontent that we didn't have marching, we didn't have protests. They did show up at the police department and then did some indigenous dances and burned candles, and were very respectful of their lost loved one. But it didn't result in any type of rioting or discontent in that sense. So that was a huge, part of just communication with someone in the community that had some influence with their community. Another example is there was an incident at Salinas High School where there was a black Barbie doll that was being abused and kicked and thrown about, and there was this great groundswell of anxiety about this hate crime. I was able to quickly communicate with Yvonne Thomas, who's the head of the NAACP, who sits on my council, and our other co-chair, Carissa Purnell, who heads up the Family Resource Center in Alisal, and shoot out to all the council members an infographic which described what a hate crime was and what a hate event was. And it was clear that this was in fact a hate event and not something that law enforcement needed to be involved with, but rather it's an educational opportunity. And the NAACP ended up engaging with the school district and providing an education opportunity for not only the teachers, but the students and the school district itself. So those are two examples of just in a short time how this particular council has been very effective. And we're learning from each other as well. Their job is to advise me so that I understand if I'm creating a policy in my office, if the unintended consequences might be on their constituency. Another example of something that's changed just in the short time is I now have a conviction review unit, and the Racial Justice Act was passed, and now that's implemented as of January of this year. I'm trying to get a Racial Justice Act attorney to address those claims. It's very convoluted, and we'll see. The public defender and I are working together to both get a deputy public defender and a deputy DA to work on that together. But our conviction review unit is it's a new position, and we review claims of wrongful convictions, clemency reviews, certificates of rehabilitation. There's been felony murder reform, which requires us to go back and re-review some cases that we've previously prosecuted. And so that's the work that's being done by this unit. And I think their work's going to broaden as a result of some new legislation. I wanted to chat and show you some of our crime rates in California. So this is California. This isn't Monterey specific. I've got some information for Monterey specifically, but I wanted to show this big broad picture of California crime rates. And up at the top, you'll see 1994, the federal crime bill and 3 strikes law. So that got passed in 1994. And you can see our crime rates actually dipped significantly after those very aggressive laws were passed. And then in 2009, we had the recession. Again, our crimes were still kind of going down. There was a bump up on vehicle thefts for a while, generally going in a downward trend. Prop 47 passed in 2014, and those are primarily theft and narcotics offenses being treated as misdemeanors and being recategorized, reclassified. And then Prop 57, which is our transfer of or reduction of people in state prison. So we leveled off here in 2018 and 2019. And so this is as of 2019. And now, if we look at specifically rapes for the same time period, you'll see this phenomenal increase in rapes. And what happened is in 2014, this I don't think had anything to do with Prop 47 or Prop 57 passing, but in 2014, well, actually 16, we started recording these differently with the state. The state determined, or the federal government determined that forcible rapes now included men, and previous to this point, they hadn't. So there's a large jump here, and it's actually a reflection, I think, of men being included into this number. So for California, this is the most recent data we have. This is up through last year, and you can see, our homicide rate this is the number here, 31 in 2020 to 2021. It's an increase of 63%. Now we know between 2019 and 21, we're dealing with a large time period involving the pandemic. We don't have a reason for this huge increase, but we do know that it's been an increase for the last 2 years. And most of that time has been during the pandemic. And for forcible rapes, we actually do have a high number. It shows a decrease by 1 rape from year 8 and 9 to 9 and 10. So it's been pretty consistently high for since 2000, I'd say 14. So for property crimes, it's a different situation. We do see this kind of decline. Part of this is explained by Prop 47, where we changed a lot of felony theft crimes to misdemeanors, and stores stopped reporting petty theft crimes because there was no significant consequence to reporting them. And you'll see that in a lot of, like, if you see those smash and grabs up in San Francisco, and or prior to the big ones, people would just load up on their bags and walk out, and no one would stop them because there was no consequence to it. There's no penalty to it. So these people feel emboldened. So so we have a lot less reporting by these commercial stores, more than mom and pop stores, but commercial stores stopped calling law enforcement to report these thefts, and we see this decline here. I feel very strongly that what we do in the DA's office is impactful, and we were able to change lives. Moving forward, I have plans for a family justice center, and that's in the works. That I'm going to start in King City for that, because they're kind of a service desert out there, and then hopefully move to Salinas. And then when the Monterey courthouse is vacated by the judges in their new facility, which is what will be in either Seaside or Marina, I plan on taking over some of their space in the Monterey courthouse for a Monterey Family Justice Center, because location and space is always an issue for that. And with that, I know I've gone on 23 minutes, so I'm chatty Kathy. This is important. This is an important phrase I keep in my mind. We are the guardians of justice at the DA's office. The police departments can arrest all day long, but if we don't find that there's sufficient probable cause to file charges and prove cases beyond a reasonable doubt, then they'll never get to court. And so we have to take our guardian position and jealously guard it and protect it, so that we can have a democracy that remains strong. And so with that, I'm happy to take any questions. I don't want to burn up too much time.
No worries. Well, thank you so much for that. That really, really great information there. It's amazing, myself included. I think many of us don't know just how much work and how much research and what goes into prosecuting all sorts of crimes, and the sort of investigation that goes into it. Myself, I'll hear about a court case or something that may have happened in the news, but it's really amazing to see what you and your office do behind the scenes, in front of the scenes in many ways, to make sure that due process is ensured for all parties involved. So I just want to commend you on all that work. It's really, really impressive. There were a couple of questions in the chat box window. I also wrote out a few questions myself. Let's see. One comment here. Congratulations. How much does DNA testing cost?
Yeah, it costs between $10,000 and $15,000 for one test.
Wow.
And that's at a private lab.
Really amazing. And in fact, on that same topic, and the comment where they said, wow, congrats. Now I realize that the context, it was when you mentioned the grant that you received from the government for funding toward those tests. So really, really impressive there. Oh, we have another question here. What percentage of the police reports do not get prosecuted, like you just mentioned?
It varies by jurisdiction. Some jurisdictions are their filing rate is more successful than others, and so it varies. It would just depend on the jurisdiction. I would say well, I can't even give you a number, and I'll tell you why. So what happens is a police agency will investigate something, whatever that something is. And if they decide, well, there's not enough information for us to prosecute, we're not even going to refer it to the DA's office, because they're not required to send anything to us. They don't have to refer a case to us. The police department makes that decision. So they could choose not to send it to us for our evaluation and review. But then, some people complain to the police department. So more often than not, even if they don't think that the case should be prosecuted, they will refer it to our office so that we take the heat on it. So if there's a victim involved case, let's say, and the police department, feels like it's not really something, or they have a difficult person, then they'll refer it to us and have us review it. And then we'll reject it if it's not appropriate, or we don't think the evidence is there. And then the police department gets coverage, if you will. They, we referred it to the DA and they rejected it. So there's some of that goes on. Some agencies do that just pretty much every report they send over. So their filing rates are going to be different than an agency that only sends over cases that they truly believe should be filed.
Gotcha. I mean, in a way, and I apologize if this sounds like I'm simplifying it too much. It almost sounds like a sort of a system of checks and balances in one way or another, one agency reporting it. But I understand what you mean, in which case, once it gets reported, in some cases in your office sort of gets the heat there. We do have another question in the chat box window. Is this soft stand on what used to be felony being reduced to a misdemeanor going to continue? Clearly crime has gone up due to this.
Well, I'm part of the executive branch and my job is to follow the law. But I will say that I do believe that the soft on crime approach for some of these offenses has contributed to a rise. It's going to continue because we have a supermajority in the legislature who firmly believes that accountability is not a desirable outcome. And because Prop 47 and Prop 57 were passed by way of initiatives, the only way they can be unwound is by an initiative unwinding them. So the voters, it wasn't done through the legislature, it was done through voter votes. So the only way to undo those laws is if there's a new initiative that basically backpedals out of that situation. So there won't be any significant changes on those areas unless the voters put it on a ballot and people vote for it.
Gotcha. It's certainly a touchy subject there, and I think it's one thing, especially many individuals who've been affected by crime in some way or another, or know people who have been affected by crime. It can be a difficult reality. One question I did write down here during my notes, I apologize, I'm trying to read my own chicken scratch here. Congratulations on no backlog of cases. I know you mentioned that early on in the presentation. Actually, going back to the question one of my colleagues had regarding the DNA test, you did mention that part of the cold case task force has been using a volunteer staff to investigate some of these cold cases. I just had a question regarding volunteer staff. What sort of qualifications does one need to be a volunteer staff? How would someone be able to do that sort of work?
So when I say volunteer staff, I'm actually talking about my own staff that are volunteering for extra duties. So they're trained investigator, they're licensed, they're employees of my county, with the exception, with my department particularly, with the exception of Bill Clark, who was the deputy chief at the city of Monterey. And he's a volunteer, but he's a licensed volunteer with our office, and he's a reserve officer still at Monterey PD. So volunteer being extra duties without pay in our office. Yeah. So all of these investigators have other jobs, and they take this on in their extra time.
Well, admittedly, I was hoping that I could do a bit of a moonlighting as an investigator for your office. I'm just
we've had other people volunteer. Yeah, it is super interesting.
Let's see here. Looks like we have another question, another comment in the chat box window here. Hi, Jeannine, you're doing great work. Can you elaborate on the relationship between probation, police departments, and your office? How about youth in the schools? It's a multi-part question, so feel free. Do you have any opinions on school resource officers? Do they work? How do we address youth offenders and keep our students on the right track?
Well, that's a lot. Well, first of all, what you may not know is that we have a truancy program in our office. I have 2 full-time prosecutors assigned to every school in the school district, in the county. So public schools. And they refer kids to us who have fallen off the reservation, so to speak. They're not attending school. When it's remote stuff, they're not signing on. They're not engaged. They're not turning in their homework. So they're considered habitual truants or chronic truants. When they're chronic truants, the schools choose which kids to refer to our office. We send out prosecutors to meet. Previously, we used to bring them in our office, and then COVID happened. We thought that bringing them into the office would kind of, lend some credence to our involvement with the youth. We've changed our process somewhat because of COVID, although I don't have a problem with having people in the office. We have a set area for those types of mediations. But we find that it's easier to get the kids and the parents at these mediations when we actually do it at the school. They're comfortable at the school. It's just a better environment. So our prosecutors go out to the schools and meet with the parents and the chronic truant at their school with school advisors, counselors, whoever the school wants to have present. So we meet as a group and we try and find out, is this a child issue or is this a parent issue? Because child truancy can be many things. Is there some developmentally delayed issue that the school's not really dealing with? Is there a narcotics issue, alcohol issue, either with the child or the parent? Is it as simple as the parents work in the fields, and once they go to work, the kids are responsible to get themselves to school, and they're not really motivated to get to school? I mean, so we try and figure out where the disconnect is and why the kid's not going to school. Is the parent incarcerated? Is this child just not having the support they need to get to school? So we try and figure that out through the mediation. For those that we can't reach, either because there's some of these parents, they're not gonna force their kids to go to school. Then we go the next step and we file charges against the parents or the child or both. And so the children who we prosecute under these charges, they never go to jail. There's no jail consequence. There's no custody consequence. What the consequence is, if we're successful, is that they go on probation, and the probation officer will go to their house, pick them up, take them to school. The probation officer will refer them to services if they need substance abuse services, if they need education support. So the probation department has to provide, or they provide those services, but they can't do it unless they're on probation. So our goal for these kids that we can't get compliant, then we get them on probation so they get access to these services that are above and beyond what the school can offer them. So there's that. In terms of school resource officers, I've had so many cases when I was prosecuting sexual assault cases where the children had come up to a school resource officer and reported to them about some inappropriate touching that was going on. And so my experience is that these resource officers, they're officers that want to be on campus, they want to engage with the kids, they're not the heavy cop presence. So that's my impression, is that it's positive. And I would definitely support that, them being on campus.
It's certainly something that maybe a lot of people don't realize about school resource officers. To that same point you just mentioned, we hear about it on the news, and a lot of the criticisms might say that, it's a uniformed officer on campus. It might be a harmful image to some youth, to some people who attend that campus or work on that campus. But I'm glad to hear that these resource officers do, that's not their job. Their job is not just to stand around and look intimidating or anything, but it's to reach out to the kids and really try to get them services that could really help them. We do have another question here in the chat box window. You had spoken about COVID. What was 1 to 2 of the most challenging parts in the past 18 to 21 months?
About COVID? Yeah, so, we had, like I said, most of my staff remotely, and trying to build community when you're looking at little boxes on a screen is hard. I mean, it's really challenging to build trust. It's challenging to kind of work in the same mission and have that sense of community in that environment. So that was challenging. Most of my prosecutors, they know what to do. They know the right thing. I've got great managers, but when you don't see people for 16 months in person, it really does kind of make it hard to work together as one community. So that was kind of a challenge. And of course, now with Omicron, I'd say about 30% of my office is out with it right now, because their kids got it and then they're home with it. So, I feel like we're making progress with this COVID stuff, but it's the COVID has been, as an administrator, which is what I'm trying to do, is administer justice and keep everybody on mission. It's been challenging. And then social justice reforms, criminal justice reforms, they're coming so fast and furious that it's hard as a prosecutor to keep up with as many changes that are happening when we don't even know the consequences of the change that happened last week or last month or last year. So that's challenging, is just trying to kind of keep up, which is why I have the conviction review unit, and I'm going after a Racial Justice Act attorney as well.
It's certainly something that I think a lot of organizations have been dealing with as well. Like you said, you're not sure what the results or the effects are of what happened last week, because you're still dealing with what's going on this week. And certainly, the Zoom format and what's been happening with COVID has affected that. One other comment in the chat box window: great presentation and info. Thank you very much. And then we have another comment here. Last month, for the entire county probation, served 32 individuals. Great program, but it is up to the schools to report truancy. Not so much a question, more just commenting on what you were speaking on before.
Yeah, we can't, we don't have the authority to dive into schools and pull their kids, the truants. It has to bubble up from the schools, and different schools have different level of tolerance for truancy. I mean, right now I personally supervise the truancy unit. I supervise the truancy unit. I supervise, in addition to all my other duties, I supervise our cannabis team, and I supervise our consumer fraud environmental units as well. But my truancy unit, we don't have the luxury of identifying these kids. But when I do file charges and I authorize the filing, unlike any other case that gets charged here, I usually have someone else, do it on a line level or a supervisor level. If I'm charging a parent or a child, I do that myself. I authorize it myself. These kids are absent for 85 school days. I mean, we're going to see, and I'm not a doomsayer, but I'm telling you, this COVID has impacted our kids so significantly that we're going to see a spike in crime. I'm not, a soothsayer or whatever, but I'm telling you, these kids, having gone through this COVID, being disconnected from their community and their learning experiences on campus, we are going to see a spike in crime in the next 3 to 5 years. I am totally confident that that's going to happen because of this negative impact that has been happening because of COVID.
I think part of me definitely feels that way as well, thinking about what the effect that COVID has had on generation growing up right now. I mean, many of us have no idea how that's going to affect them. It's going to affect their families, and I do foresee that as well. I think that's a good point. And now I do have a number of other questions I was hoping to ask, but looking at the time, I think we have time for one more question here in the chat box window, referring to the number of staff being out due to COVID. 30% outage is really challenging. Hopefully all stay safe. If you had a magic wand, what 1 to 2 things would you change with the current penal system? Also, and this is a hardball question here, what do you do for fun and personal enjoyment?
1 or 2 things, the penal system. I believe in accountability, and I want victims to have their day in court and to have their fair day in court. And my concern about all of these criminal justice reforms is none of them take into account the impact on the victim. They don't. We have a Victims' Bill of Rights. It's in our state constitution. And it seems as if all of these bills, these penal code changes, don't take into account victims' rights. And so I would just have them undo that stuff and redo it with a lens toward representing a victim's interest also. So I think that they're very singularly focused on the defendant and they aren't taking into account the victim. So that's what I would do that. For fun and enjoyment, well, I have 3 kids and they're all in college, thank God. But I would say, and they were in high school when I took over this position. They're all now in college. I would say my fun and enjoyment was going to football games and soccer games and volleyball games and every other activity my kids were involved in. That was my fun and enjoyment. Since they've been gone, and COVID hit at the same time. So I haven't had a lot of fun and enjoyment. I'm hoping to pick up golf at some point in the next year. That's my plan. Just because it's outside and it's great exercise and seems like it would be challenging.
Wonderful. All right. Well, thank you. Thank you so much, Jeannine. It is 12:51 right now, so I think we're going to go ahead and end the question and answer session. But once again, I'm kind of piggybacking what I was talking about earlier. I myself, I hear about all these cases and hear about different degrees of crime in the community, and hear about them being prosecuted and making sure that the rights of the victims are respected, they get their day in court. And there's so many pieces that go into that I myself am not very familiar with. So really, just want to thank you so much for all the work that you do and all the work that your office does to make sure that that wheel of justice continues. So thank you for sharing that with this club today.
Thank you for having me. I absolutely, love talking to everybody about this. I'm very passionate about it, you might tell. And hi, Sherry. All right. And everyone, if you're interested in having a further conversation with me, or if you have questions that aren't answered here, reach out to my office. I'm happy to chat with you.
Fantastic. Well, in fact, what I'd like to do is I've been a bit lax on this, club members. I apologize for this, but I would like to send a thank you for attending email to the club, which will have a YouTube link to today's video. And of course, Jeannine, I'll be sure to share that with you. If you'd be willing to share your contact info with us, I can include that in the email as well.
Great. I'll send that to you.
Fantastic. All right, I'm going to go ahead and end the recording function now.